There's a bird in your yard right now that's been assessing you, not for months, for as long as it's lived there. And while it almost certainly isn't waiting for you in the emotional sense the phrase suggests, the research shows something more interesting than that. It has been quietly building a behavioral profile of you over hundreds of observations, and there's a specific signal on your part that would shift that profile in a measurable way. Most humans never give the signal, not because they don't care, but because they have no idea it matters. To understand any of this, you have to start with what the bird has already done, because by the time you read this, it's done quite a music bit. A male northern cardinal that's been visiting your yard for 3 years has observed you many hundreds of times every morning you stepped outside, every walk to the mailbox, every afternoon spent in the garden. He hasn't built the kind of detailed individual face recognition profile that a crow would. The cognitive architecture for that level of recognition is found mainly in corvids, not in cardinals or finches. What songbirds do build, however, is a pattern-based profile. Your gait, music, your usual routine, the tone of your voice through the open window, the rhythm of your movement. The cardinal can't necessarily distinguish your face from your neighbor's the way a crow could, but he can absolutely distinguish your overall presence pattern. And over thousands of small observations, he has done exactly that. This is where the gap forms. The bird has categorized you, and that categorization is almost always safe presence. You don't chase him or lunge at him, and you don't move unpredictably. Over months and years of observation, he has classified you as a non-threat, which from his perspective is the correct outcome. But that classification is not static. Birds continuously update their risk assessment of every feature in their environment, including the humans. And there are specific signals that can move you from tolerated background presence to individually recognized low risk. That movement is what people are really describing when they say a bird has warmed music up to them, and it's grounded in observable behavior rather than emotion. Where it gets genuinely interesting is in how birds monitor where your attention is pointed. A study published in the Proceedings of the Royal Society tested European magpies' responses to humans who either looked directly at them or deliberately looked away. Magpies allowed humans who weren't looking to approach significantly closer. They flushed earlier when stared at. The birds weren't just monitoring whether the human was present. They were monitoring whether the human's attention was directed at them. This kind of gaze sensitivity has been documented across many bird species, not just corvids, because the reason for it is older than corvid intelligence. Every visual predator on Earth fixes its eyes on prey before striking. Direct, prolonged gaze is, by evolutionary default, the precursor to an attack. Birds that didn't track human eye direction didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. This is what makes the brief, soft acknowledgment so interesting from a behavioral standpoint. A 2-second glance directed loosely at a bird followed by your gaze moving naturally elsewhere doesn't trigger the predator focus response. What it does instead is register as novel, non-threatening data the bird hasn't recorded from you before. Most humans either don't look at birds at all or stare too long, and both of those patterns have already been filed. A pattern, brief, calm acknowledgment with no follow-up threat behavior is information the bird's threat assessment system has to process and incorporate. That processing is what produces the small behavioral shifts that people often describe as the bird responding to me. Voice works on a similar principle. Research on house sparrows, published in Animal Cognition, demonstrated that sparrows learn to associate specific Human voices with specific outcomes, food, threat, or simply neutral presence. Your voice is something the cardinal in your yard has heard hundreds of times through windows and conversations on the porch. But he has almost never heard you speak at the volume and tone associated with addressing him directly. Soft, low, calm vocalization without sudden volume or sharpness gets filed as social communication, even if the bird doesn't comprehend a single word of it. He's reading the acoustic signature, the tone, the lack of aggression, the directional attention, and adding it to his profile of you. When you actually do these things together, the brief glance and the soft voice, researchers studying long-term bird-human interactions have noted a consistent response. The bird notices almost instantly. He freezes for a fraction of a second, tilts his head, and looks back at you. It's worth being honest about what's actually happening in that moment, because the popular framing of it gets the science wrong. The freeze isn't recognition in any emotional sense. He's recalculating his flight distance because you broke your usual routine and stopped instead of walking past. The head tilt isn't acknowledgment in return. Birds have laterally placed eyes and tilt their heads to bring one eye forward and focus more clearly on something they want a better look at. What he's doing is gathering data on what music just changed. But this is still meaningful because the data gathering itself is the proof that your action registered. The bird flagged you as different from the previous 1,000 interactions, and that flag is what eventually moves the categorization. What follows that single moment of registration, if you continue doing it, is where the real behavioral shift happens. Birds that experience repeated, consistent, low-threat interactions with a specific human gradually allow closer approach, return to feeders more reliably when that person is present, and reduce their alarm call frequency in response to that person's appearance. The bird isn't experiencing affection. He's revising his risk model. But the practical outcome, a bird that stays on the fence post while you fill the feeder instead of flying to the far side of the yard, is real, and it's a direct result of behavior you control. The time scale here matters more than people generally realize. A black-capped chickadee in the wild averages about 2 years of life, though some reach 11. A northern cardinal averages 3 years, though they can live music to 15. A robin averages 2, but can stretch to 13. These are short lives spent in a state of nearly continuous vigilance, and every day a bird spends in your yard represents a meaningful fraction of its existence. The chickadee that's been visiting your feeder for 2 years has been visiting it for most of his life. Throughout that span, every morning and every afternoon, he has been doing the same thing, assessing the environment for threats and resources. You are, whether you realize it or not, a major feature of that environment. There are documented cases of birds maintaining what looks like vigil at locations long after the humans they associated with those places stopped appearing. These cases come almost exclusively from research on corvids, crows returning for weeks to spots music, where deceased caregivers used to feed them. Individual birds maintaining presence at meaningful sites long after the events that made them significant had passed. It would be inaccurate to extend this directly to cardinals and chickadees. The cognitive and social complexity behind those corvid behaviors isn't present in most songbirds. But what is present across nearly all bird species is the capacity to track, learn, and respond to specific humans, and to update behavior in measurable ways based on what those humans do. In practical terms, what does any of this mean for you? It means that if a bird has been coming to your yard for any length of time, you are part of its working profile of the territory. And there are specific signals you can give that will measurably change how it perceives you. Stop for 2 seconds tomorrow morning when you go out to fill the feeder. Find the bird that's already there. There will almost certainly be one because they've learned your schedule and they're positioned for it. Look at him briefly, no more than a couple of seconds, with a kind of soft attention that doesn't lock into a stare. Say something quiet in a low tone, whatever feels natural. Then look away. Finish what you came out to do and go on with the day. If you do this consistently for a week, the bird's behavior will shift in ways you can observe. He'll linger longer when you're outside, allow closer approach, and reduce his alarm response when you appear. Within a month, the relationship will be measurably different, even if relationship is doing more work in that sentence music than the bird's psychology can fully support. This is what the bird has been quietly registering for. Not friendship, not connection in the way humans understand those words, but a recalibration of his risk model that meaningfully affects his daily life. To a cardinal who lives 3 years, the difference between treating a backyard as neutral with vigilant monitoring versus actively safe with a known low-risk human is a real difference in the quality of his existence. God, less time spent in alarm, more time spent feeding and resting, lower baseline stress. You can be the reason that shift happens, and it takes 2 music seconds and costs you nothing. For the small life that has been quietly tracking you all this time, it isn't a small thing. Tell me in the comments, is there a specific bird in your yard you've started to recognize as an individual? Have you ever stopped and acknowledged one directly? And did you notice a shift in how it behaved around you afterward? I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.